Morning going. Uh, we're going to be talking about business strategy, and that's going to be introductory to a lot of what we talk about during the semester, because one of the key points that I want to make about HR is that it's very important from a strategic business standpoint. When I say strategic, that in part means profit making, and in part means maintaining the viability of the business, and in part means that the business is aiming to increase its market share, to increase its sales, to increase its viability. So when we talk about business strategy, what we're really talking about is companies need to find a way to make themselves profitable. And we all know that, but we haven't often ordered our thinking about what that means. And a lot of people, if you talk to somebody who's never studied economics or business or some related subject, that they think of profit as something immoral, or it's something unfair. And that's, of course, not the case. In order for a business to exist, it needs to get resources. And the way it gets resources is through investors. So if I want to start a hat company, I want to start a company that manufactures hats, I need to find some resources that enable me to manufacture the hats. And those resources will take the form of an investment. The investment can come from myself, if I have it, or it can come from my relatives or outside investors, angels, or other kind of investors. But in order for me to attract investors, and including myself, if I don't want to eventually become bankrupt, is that I need to make a profit, that I need to give those investors a return on their investment. If I cannot do that, then my business cannot function. And all businesses need, maybe not this year, but eventually need to make a profit. So, this is just the basics of business, and I'm going over it just in case someone hasn't studied basic economics before. But basically, the question then becomes, once I've started my business, how do I ensure that it advances? How do I ensure that it becomes more profitable? How do I ensure that it grows? How do I ensure that it gets more market share? How do I ensure that sales go up? And that's where this idea of business strategy comes in. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And the idea is that there are certain patterns by which firms can compete. Okay. And basically there are four, according to Michael Porter. But in order to understand why these four generic strategies, so let me put that on the whiteboard, generic strategies apply, you need to first understand the environment in which the firm exists. So Porter says that there are four generic strategies. Okay. But what he also says is that the competitive environment largely shapes which of these strategies we can apply. So the competitive environment, I'm going to try to draw a line here. I'm not having good luck with this line. Oh, maybe I'm doing it the wrong way. Oh yeah, there we go. So the competitive environment the competitive environment influences which of the strategies we can apply. And this is very important. So I sent to you a video of Sam Ovens. I don't know if anyone had a chance to read it. It was just not required or anything. And he says in there that studying Porter's five forces is a waste of time. I don't really agree with that. I think it's true in the short run. Like for someone like him who's focused, he's a small scale entrepreneur. He's quite successful financially, but he's a small scale entrepreneur. And for him, he's got his strategy. He already knows what his strategy is. I think companies that are more ambiguous, that are bigger, that aren't as clear about what they're doing, and that certainly exists in a lot of places, do need to think about what their competitive environment is. Porter is basically an economist. He's not a management person, but he realized that you can use economic ideas in management. And that was an important insight, and one that labor scholars, and I was trained to a degree in labor, have recognized for many decades, for a century or more, that you can't manage industrial relations well without understanding economics. And the same is true of a business, of course, that in order to really identify what course of action to pursue, you need to understand your economic environment, and you need to understand what economic strategies are available to you. So Porter claimed that there are five economic forces in the environment. Okay, so Porter's five forces are part of the economic environment. What other factors affect HR? We're talking about the business as a whole, but certainly the economic environment affects HR. Can you think of any other environmental forces that affect HR? Anyone? Anyone want to take a stab at that? I know it's hard online. Anyone want to venture a guess as to what environmental forces, besides the very good video? I think you mean Sam Ovens. Yeah, I think his video is great. What environmental forces besides economics, besides the economic cycle, affect human resources, human resource management? Anyone? Well, we'll talk about it. In fact, we'll talk about it today, but certainly things like government regulation, demographics, preferences, generational differences, the firm's technology, all of these things, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I want to get through the Porter stuff first. So basically, Porter's 5 forces are as follows. First of all, substitutability. So are there ready substitutes for products? For example, if I'm making an automobile, is it easy to replace my automobile with another automobile? And in many cases, many makes, the answer may be yes. That, in other words, excuse me, you can replace a let's say a Chevrolet with a Ford, or so there's certainly substitutability among cars. What about a product like tomato sauce? So you buy let's say one of those imported brands of tomato sauce, I can never remember the names, and you say one day, well, I think I'll use Hunt's today instead of, or Progresso instead of the imported brand. It's perfectly replaceable, and that's why often it's very difficult for many kinds of manufacturers to charge a higher price than their competitors, because people just move to the other product. Second of all, the competitive rivalry in the industry. The competitive rivalry means how motivated are the different firms in the competitive space, in the competitive environment, to compete with each other, versus how motivated are these firms to cooperate. If you look at the American car industry in the 1950s, 70 years ago, the automobile companies in America would all work together. It was illegal to set prices in unison, but they came as close to that as they could without breaking the law, and that was called price leadership. Okay, price leadership was that General Motors would set the price for its models, and then Ford and Chrysler would match the price. They had a discount to the General Motors price, and if General Motors raised its price by 1%, they would raise their price by the same percent. Okay, in other industries, there's cutthroat rivalry. For example, Coke and Pepsi. One week there's a sale on the Coke in the supermarket, the next week there's a sale on the Pepsi. Those of you who shop at Whole Foods may not be aware of that, but or Trader Joe's, but if you go to a regular supermarket, you know what I'm talking about. Other examples, cigarettes. They spend huge amounts on advertising, trying to outcompete each other's brands. Probably Samsung versus Apple, a lot of competition there. So in some industries, there's competitive rivalry. In other industries, there's more collusion or cooperation. Sometimes this can run afoul of the antitrust laws, but most smart companies don't go that far. They know how far to go without breaching the Sherman Antitrust Act. Number three, ease of entry. They used to use the automobile industry as an example that the capital costs are so high that other firms can't enter the space. So, if you were General Motors and you had these massive investments in plant and equipment in the 1950s and 60s, economists believed that other firms would have trouble ever competing with one of the big three American car companies. Then Toyota came along and they gradually developed a capital base, and they showed, along with Honda, that Japanese companies could compete effectively, and they actually outcompeted American car companies. And you also had in the 1950s the expansion of the German car companies, notably Volkswagen and the luxury brands. And so gradually more entrants to the car companies showed that while entry wasn't overnight, it could be done. So there was more competition introduced into the automobile industry. And today, the big three can't really set prices. And in other words, they're going to have to compete with Hyundai and Volkswagen and Toyota, the Toyota brand, and on and on. So, but if there isn't ease of entry, let's say it's very difficult to duplicate the technology of Apple. And so very few firms can produce smartphones that are, I personally am not a fan of Apple, but they're obviously very successful. And I think a lot of people do like the technology, at least of the smartphone. I'm not so sure of the computer. I'm using an Apple right now. So anyway, because it's hard to duplicate their technology, you won't get a lot of people. Like if I woke up tomorrow and said, oh, I want to compete with Apple, I want to start making smartphones, I'd have to have my head examined, because first of all, to understand the technology would require a huge, supply of PhDs and genius, tech people, and a huge amount of capital and so on. So there's relatively little ease of entry. The same thing could be said of a small but unique restaurant. My wife and I moved down to NoHo last fall because she was eager to live in the city. I'd been living in the country a long time. And one thing I noticed is that there are certain restaurants in this neighborhood that always have huge lines outside. There's the Lafayette Bakery, for example. There's often a line around the block to have their baked goods. It's, I guess, called the Lafayette Grand Cafe. And I walk past there all the time, and I'm often stunned that people are standing there literally for an hour to get one of their items. That's like croissants and pastries of various kinds. I went in there one time, there was no line. I went in there and it was very good, but there's no way I'd ever wait online for that. But basically, a lot of people feel it is. So, even there's a competitive advantage on that level. It seems clear to me that other bakers can't duplicate what the guy that runs that, whoever it is, what the person does as far as producing unique pastries and croissants. So they have a competitive advantage. They have they're not substitutable. other places, that there's a million places within a 3-minute walk of there that sell croissants, but people wait for those croissants. So, so that's basically, a lack of substitutability. And we'll talk about how a firm can target that as a strategy. But right now we're talking about how products inherently can be substitutable or not, or whether there's ease of entry or no ease of entry in the marketplace. And the final two competitive, five forces are bargaining power of suppliers and bargaining power of buyers. Okay, and basically, the bargaining power of suppliers is where the supplier produces something for which there's no substitutes, and it's very hard to find alternative inputs. So I think the prime example in the past 50 years has been Microsoft. That when the PC was invented, Bill Gates actually programmed the first operating system for a personal computer when he was still a student. And their aim was to supply software for the PC market. They didn't initially expect to be a specialist in operating systems. However, Gates's mother was on the board of directors of the United Way, the charity, with the CEO of IBM, with the chairman of IBM. I think he was CEO also. And the two conversed, and he found out that Bill Gates might be able to provide him with an operating system. As it turned out, he didn't, but he knew someone who had written an operating system, and he went to the guy and bought the operating system without telling the guy what it was for $50,000. And then he turned around and reworked it with his company to suit IBM's needs. And then that became the standard operating system for all the personal computers other than Apple. And so basically that led to Microsoft providing what was then, this I'm talking about in the 1980s, the operating system for all the non-Apple computers. They were called at that time IBM clones, and it was called DOS, Disk Operating System. This then established Microsoft as the dominant supplier. And what made it non-substitutable and what gave him tremendous bargaining power was not that it was impossible for others to program operating systems, but that all the manufacturers had adopted this operating system, and the cost of changing was high. And also, it was a prisoner's dilemma, because if anyone switched out, they would be like Apple. They would be crushed because everyone else had the same. I don't know if you call that a prisoner's dilemma. Really, I don't think that is, but they would be crushed by the fact that everyone else was still using the other operating system. So basically, through a combination of extraordinary manipulation and negotiation skill, and as well marketing savvy, he established DOS as the industry standard, and so created huge bargaining power for Microsoft. And that was added to because although Apple was the first successful PC, personal computer. Jobs miscalculated and wanted to focus on the hardware rather than the software. And so Apple kept the software proprietary to Apple, which then marginalized their personal computers. So the result was that Gates ended up with huge bargaining power, and he was supplying all the PC manufacturers outside Apple and a few specialists who were using things like, I think it was called Unix. And so he made a killing, and that's why he's so rich now. I don't think he's the richest in the world anymore, but he's in the top few to this day. So let's see, richest people in the world ranking. So you've got the 10 richest in the world right now are Arnault, who is from France, Christian Dior, interesting. Elon Musk, although that I think may be changing, that may be out of date at this point. 3, Bezos, because of Amazon. 4, Adani, who's I think a shipping guy. And Gates is 5. So Gates is the 5th richest in the world. And this all came from stuff he did when he was in his early 20s, the stuff he pulled really. So basically, I'm not saying he didn't do a lot of good things thereafter. I mean, Microsoft, not least of which is that Chat GPT, they're still doing really smart things. So, and the other one, bargaining power of buyers, I think is best illustrated by Walmart. I could also use the historical example of Standard Oil. I'll start with that one. Standard Oil. Anyone know who founded Standard Oil or where it came from?
I know Mr. John Rockefeller is associated with.
Yes, very good. Olalekin, right?
Yeah.
Yes, excellent. Not everybody knows that. John D. Rockefeller, right after the Civil War, was he still a very young man? He had run a dry goods store with some partners, and then they decided to invest in oil. And he really had no special expertise in that field, but was a genius, a brilliant business and financial thinker, and turned Standard Oil into what became a monopoly, in effect. Economists define monopoly as if a firm controls at least 80% of the market. And Standard Oil did. What you need to understand, though, like Standard Oil was hated by the progressives, the early 20th century Republican reformers known as the progressives, wanted to address the problem of trusts. And Theodore Roosevelt, he probably knows, a Republican, argued that there are good trusts and bad trusts. However, he thought that you could regulate the trusts and make them work on behalf of the public interest rather than selfish interest by regulating them and essentially socializing them. He favored things. There's a fascinating book. I'll think of the author, Martin J. Sklar, who wrote this book about the evolution of the trust law in the late 19th century. and the corporate, it's called The Corporate Reconstruction of American Capitalism, 1890 to 1916. It's a very difficult book, and his writing is tough. But what he basically argues in there is that no one was really clear as to what the way to interpret the Sherman Antitrust Act had been passed, and a lot of jurisprudence in that area for 25 years held that it was just a restatement of common law. And then there was a battle between Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, who was the president after Roosevelt. He was Roosevelt's protege, and Taft favored not regulating trusts. He didn't follow Roosevelt's plan, and instead wanted to use the Justice Department to sue trusts. And in 1911, they broke up, the Justice Department broke up Standard Oil and turned it into multiple companies that you know today. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, most of the big American oil companies are descended from Standard Oil. So, you know, things like Arco and, you know, all the oil company, all the gas stations you go to, they're mostly descended from Standard Oil. Not Shell was, Shell is an Anglo-Dutch company. But anyway, although these people, the progressives, and there was a famous writer named Ida Tarbell who attacked Standard Oil in a book called The History of the Standard Oil Company, which has a sort of a formal title, but was really a political book attacking. Yes, Georgie, yes, your question?
Yeah, I have a question. Hello, Professor. So my question is about the Justice Department, like kind of break down the Standard Oil Company.
Yeah.
So let's say the goal of capitalism is to give the freedom of the business, right? So is there like kind of limit that your business can go at some point, and then government involves and just shut down your company? Let's say I have a company, right, and I'm getting really rich, like maybe I reach like $1 trillion, and I have monopoly in the United States. So one day, like the Justice Department is gonna knock on my door and tell me you have too much power and you cannot have that much power. So this looks like kind of communism. It just look like government is like has limits on when it comes to the freedom, or like, so that's value of the United States is like capitalism, right? Freedom, right? So why they just break this company down if there's value?
I'm sympathetic. I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, and there it is an inconsistency. I'm not defending it. I happen to be a libertarian politically, which means I agree with the perspective you're raising. I actually agree with you, but to give you a little bit of history, and I think, like, if you're interested in these questions philosophically, and they've been wrestled with by a lot of really smart people, and of course there are many different answers. You know, the progressives, small p today, you know, the left, they favor extensive government intervention in the economy and very little concern for property rights. You know, they favor environmental restrictions and, you know, all kinds of things that intrude heavily on the more conservative people today are more sympathetic to what you're saying, but they came from a background that really is closer to the capital P progressivism of the early 20th century of Theodore Roosevelt. And so the two parties are really both big government parties. It's important to understand that. So the Republicans are in favor of big government, regulation of business, but less social welfare, while the Democrats tend to be also in favor of regulation of business and in favor of a lot of the same kind of regulatory institutions such as the Federal Reserve Bank and the Sherman Antitrust Act, but they also are more in support of social welfare. So basically, if you look historically, the model of laissez-faire capitalism was largely rejected in the around 1900 by the Republicans. At that time, the Democrats were the more conservative party. That may surprise you, but to people who read about American history, it's no surprise. So basically, the Democrats at that time were the more laissez-faire party until about 1890, mid 1890s, say, and the Republicans were the bigger government party back then, and they favored more intervention. But it may surprise you that the intervention advocated by the Republicans in that time was associated with support for the wealthy. So the party of big government in the 19th century was also the party of the wealthy. And it was assumed that government intervention would subsidize the wealthy. All right. And this was the party, this started, there was a series of different political parties that supported this, and they were all linked. The first was Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, who was of his day, a big business person, a lawyer and a big business person. And he was the co-founder of the Bank of New York, the co-founder of the New York Post, and he favored centralization, government control, government regulation, government support for business. And all of this was intended to benefit the wealthy. There's no debate about that on any one side. The counterparty that reacted to this, they were called the Federalists, Hamilton and Washington. And the counterparty to this, the Democrats, were the party of the small entrepreneur. Basically, this farmer was more common then. And they favored laissez-faire, just like you. You were in that tradition. And so those two, dog and the devil, battled throughout the 19th century. The Federalists were completely defeated in 1800 when Thomas Jefferson was elected president. And for 20 years, there was no real party. They call it the era of good feelings. But around that time, the two tendencies, one favoring central banking, one favoring hard money, one favoring subsidies to industry, one opposing them, one favoring public works, one opposing public works. These two groups then started two different parties. And at first it was called the Whig Party, started by Henry Clay. And Clay was assisted over time by a protege named Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln was a railroad lawyer, and he was a friend of big business, basically. And what happened, I can't give you all of American history, but of course, as all of you know, slavery was a major issue in the early 19th century, and it broke apart the Whig Party, which was then replaced by the Republican Party, which included abolitionists, big business interests, and the religious Americans, and they then opposed the working class and the entrepreneur and the farmers of the Democrats, who were also the more racist party, disgracefully. So basically, the Democrats were the party of the little guy, but also the party of racism, and also the party of opposing central banking. And they had totally different foreign policies. You need to spend your whole life studying all this. And basically, these two groups fought each other through the 19th century. By the late 19th century, that started to change, because after the Civil War, the southern planters had been a counterbalance to northern big business, and they were destroyed basically. So northern big business acquired more power, and there had been hyperinflation in both north and south. When I say hyperinflation, it was above 20%. I don't know if technically that counts as hyperinflation, but it was high inflation in both north and south, and that had to be reined in. And so this inflation led to increasing centralization of the economy, and there was a lot of corruption in New York. One big business person was named Jay Gould, who was a complete crook. I don't know, but I've met some of his descendants. They live not far from where I live in the Catskills. And basically, Gould and the Tammany politicians, Tammany was the Democratic political machine in New York, were entirely corrupt. They were stealing money right and left and so on. And there was a lot of angst and concern about the centralization of business. And they called these guys in the late 19th century the robber barons. And so the Republicans adopted this theory of progressivism, that you use government to counteract the power of big business. And that was when they passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. And there was also the Interstate Commerce Act and some other laws. There was also increasing state regulation of business. And this was being fought by the traditional Democrats and the pro-liberty Republicans. It was being fought at that time. But what happened was that the arguments of the Republicans prevailed, and it was aided by an increasing impulse towards socialism in some of the rural states. This was called populism. And in 1896, the Democrats nominated a soft money. Remember, they had always been the hard money party. And they nominated a soft money candidate, William Jennings Bryan, who said that mankind should not be crucified on a cross of gold. That, in other words, hard money was hurting property owners. And the argument was that small farmers were losing their farms because of deflation. In fact, though, farmers were always land speculators, and the people who were being hurt also included big business and Wall Street. It wasn't, the populism was not exactly a movement of just the poor. This had a great resonance on Wall Street, and books were being written in the early 20th century how there was a need for soft money and so on. This was also a period where the big business interests in America, led by J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller, began to feel that there was a need for more rationalization of the economy. So you put those two things together. There was also immigration from Eastern Europe, which was more sympathetic to socialism as well. So you put these different things together, increased sympathy for socialism, and there's no doubt that there was increasing radicalization in New York and elsewhere in that period. Populism in the rural states, and an interest in rationalization of the economy by the elite, that the elite could then use these populist impulses, these socialist and populist impulses, to reinvent the American economy. And as a result, the laissez-faire philosophy that you're describing was in no small part rejected by the progressives, and led by Theodore Roosevelt and a famous writer. Let me get, I'll put a few books down. If you're interested, you can read these books, and I'll clear this for now. Uh, uh, so if you want to see the history of progressivism from a New Left revisionist standpoint, I recommend the book, the Gabriel Kalko, The Triumph of Conservatism. And you'll see in his arguments, I'm not going to recommend to you Martin J. Sklar's book, because it's hard to read, and it's a real struggle to read. So, but there was also at that time an important writer named Herbert Crowley, who wrote the Bible of progressivism with capital P that Theodore Roosevelt followed, called Herbert Crowley's book was The Promise of American Life. And what this new model argued was that you were going to have an economy based on market principles, but heavily regulated, rationalized by the recently discovered, within the past 30 years of that time, principle of marginalism, that firms would produce rationally based on the equation of marginal cost and revenue, that the economy would be highly regulated, and that the government would retain the power, albeit unconstitutional, that to regulate business. Okay, as well, there was a push in the States, for example, by an important economist who was largely the framer of what became the New Deal, John R. Commons. And Commons created something we're going to talk about later in the semester called workers' compensation. And all the states adopted this, and there was all kinds of regulation. Now, you're saying, was this unconstitutional? And those arguments were made. And it was litigated, and the courts were willing to sacrifice the strict interpretation of the Constitution that many of us prefer in favor of a looser interpretation that granted unlimited power to the state. Now, what they called this, what Crowley and his associates, and Herbert Crowley had two close partners, Walter Weil and Walter Lippmann, and they founded the magazine, which recently went out of business, The New Republic. It lasted over a century. And the idea of the New Republic, you'll notice the New Republic, that they were reframing the Republic along progressive lines, that the state now had the power to regulate business. And this was the work largely of the Republican Party. However, the Democrats too, following Bryan, who had introduced socialism into what had been the conservative Democratic Party, and that was done in order to preempt the populists, to stop populism from expanding further. The Wall Street people decided in 1912 to get rid of Taft, who they felt was too conservative, and replace Taft with a Democrat who had been pro-gold, named Woodrow Wilson. Okay, and the way that they got rid of Taft was that Taft was the Republican and Wilson was nominated as the Democrat. The Morgan then appointed one of his henchmen to found what was called the Progressive Party. And that was then supported Theodore Roosevelt to run as a third party candidate. The third party candidacy, and the Progressive Party was directly linked to JP Morgan. There's no question. I'm trying to remember the name of the head of it. I'm just looking it up for a second. He had been the George Perkins. George Perkins had been the henchman of JP Morgan, and was the president of International Harvester, which was a Morgan firm, and other things. And he was appointed and used his own money to run the Progressive Party, and they then nominated Theodore Roosevelt. So there's no question that this was done by Morgan. Wilson was then elected, and JP Morgan had died in 1912. I'm just looking up, 1913, March 1913. And he was viewed as the support for the markets. If the markets fell, he would support the markets. In December of that year, Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act and established the Federal Reserve, which was the central piece of central institution that the progressives established. It wasn't by far the only one, but it was the chief one. And you'll see this when we discuss later in the semester. I'm going to show you a video on the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire, which was a terrible horror, and was the result of a system that was somewhat out of kilter and could have been adjusted. But the way that the progressive chose to adjust it, and when we talk about Al Smith and the reforms that Smith instituted, along with Robert Wagner, Senator Robert Wagner, who at that time was the head of the New York State Senate, and Smith was the head of the New York State Assembly. And the reforms that those two implemented marked a transformation from laissez-faire capitalism to a state-motivated, state-dominated economy that still uses market processes, but is still largely state-governed. This also, and it happened at almost the exact same time throughout the world, was reinforced and supplemented by World War I. And no force was more influential in creating expanding the role of government and expanding the role of the state than World War I. This was true in Europe as well as America. And it led directly to World War II as well, and as well the tyrannies that Europe suffered in the subsequent century. This was all linked to World War I. And again, this is in a history class, but I just gave you a big overview that you probably never had before of American history. And so as a result of all this, when we talk about the Sherman Antitrust Act, and Sklar's book is truly an amazing work, but one that's difficult, The Corporate Reconstruction of American Capitalism. He makes clear with reference to the antitrust aspects how this evolution was occurring. And so what we have today is basically a Republican Party that's always been something of a progressive party, a Democratic Party that had been a conservative party and became a more socialistic party, and a minority that is unhappy with the expansion of government. Does that answer your question?
Yes. You I understand the history, and like I always felt like there's like two parties in huge country like United States, like population is like 350 million, around that. So how come that there's only blue and red in this country? Like why?
Yeah.
Like what it look like. Let's say I need $100, right? And there is like one guy who's telling me I can give you like $20, and there's another guy who is telling me I can give you $25.
Yeah.
You have a very little option, and that's kind of weird. That's kind
Yeah.
of this structure
There's
is
a
like
reason-
weird, because
Yeah,
how come that there's only
it's
two
built
opinions
into
in this
our-
country, like only two political views, when there's like huge diversity? You have a lot of people from different culture, you know what I'm saying? Like you have like a lot of people, like you don't have only one ethnic like one ethnic group. You have like maybe like 500 ethnic group, and there this 500 like this 500 ethnic group has to make only one choice, right, between two parties. Either
Yeah,
you have to be
yeah.
Republican or Democrat.
That's built into our
That's weird,
yeah, that's built into the way the electoral system works. If you research first past the post electoral systems, it leads to a two-party system. It's empirically observable that the way our system is set up leads inevitably to a two-party system. Someone had their hand up.
Yeah, that was me. It
Go
was
ahead.
me, Alexi. No, I was just trying to like not to agree, but I was trying to add on to what he was saying. Basically, I just feel like this country is a ruling country, like in their way. Like the same way if we go anywhere else and they're more open to listening to other people, but it's still gonna go their way in a sense. They're gonna listen to us, but it's still their way. But
Yeah.
in the US, I just feel like they're gonna put different systems in place to the point where we have to follow those type of policies so that it could work. So I feel like any other people that come from any other country to come here, they're not used to it, but it's like almost the same, but it's not, because at the end of the day, they have their own policy that we have to follow. So like to say what you were saying, like it's it's in the system regardless. The system is set up a way where we have to follow those type of policies or
Yeah.
we're gonna mess up.
Yeah. There are a couple of theories as to how these policies get adopted. One point of view is that it's in the public interest, that the reason we have the policy mix we have in any area, whether it's Social Security or healthcare or whatever, is due to public preference. That, in other words, the public wants a certain thing, and the elite, the government and the elite respond to that and adopt the things the public wants. That's one point of view. Another point of view is that many of these things are due to the lobbying by special interest groups, and that the public often does not get what it wants because there are no incentives for it to lobby against what the industry is doing. So, a couple of books on that subject that I recommend, especially as an introduction, Mansur Olson's it's a pretty fun book to read, and it's clear. Rise and Decline of Nations. And a much more difficult book, but one that's very rigorous theoretically. And what won James Buchanan the Nobel Prize in Economics is called Calculus of Consent. And what these people, they're called more or less public choice theorists. And there was an article as well by a guy named George Stigler, which you can look up on the web. It's a journal article, not a book, called The Theory of Economic Regulation. And what he says is very close to what the public choice folks. Stigler was a professor in the University of Chicago. Buchanan and Tulloch, I think taught at Maryland. Mansur Olson taught at Maryland. Buchanan taught at George Mason University for a long time. I don't know what before that, but in any case, all these guys are basically saying that if you do a rigorous analysis of the economic incentive structure in a democracy, the incentives favor small groups, because the benefit from lobbying by a concentrated industry, say, or by a labor union, or by a group of public employees, that the benefits from lobbying by these small groups is big enough for them to spend the kind of time and money necessary to get a law passed. Whereas the amount that we pay for any one law is divided among 300 million people. So the incentive is too small to motivate us. For instance, let's say a group of doctors gets together and lobbies for some increase in fees for doctors. Let's say for each doctor that results in a $100,000 raise, so they get huge raise from this lobbying. Now, if you divide that raise by the number of taxpayers, that comes out to only $20 per taxpayer. So how much time are the taxpayers willing to spend on lobbying and countering the doctor lobby? I don't mean to pick on doctors, those of you who want to be a doctor, I'm not picking on you, it could be anything. To counteract the doctor lobbying, it's just not economically feasible. So, I mean, what this boring analysis says is basically that all the politics that you see on television are baloney, that nobody is really telling you what's actually happening. And most of the people giving you the news, including the reporters at the prestigious newspapers, are not intellectually equipped. They're not able to even figure out why things are being done, because special interest pressure results in a large share of the laws. Now, there's no doubt that every once in a while the public rises up and the public says, we've been screwed. We want to stop inflation. Our orange juice prices are going up 20% a year. Our egg prices have gone up twofold. So the public gets angry, and they, that's when they elected Reagan because of that. And that's when I think Trump was also something like that, but it was more complicated. And so basically the public sometimes stands up and elects, but they often do it in a stupid way. And they often don't really understand what it is they're doing. They're just not, they don't have the information. Like one of the points that Olson makes is that in order to gain the information to counteract the regulatory process in an industry is virtually impossible for any one person. I know when I worked on pension law in the 1980s, when I was in my 30s and 20s, I spent my whole working day trying to learn pension regulation, and I couldn't even learn that. So you're really going to figure out why the IRS did something or didn't do something, or what's motivating a given set of laws. Okay, now, so far I've gone over what I might call public interest theory of regulation. And I also mentioned what might be called the public choice theory of regulation, or private interest. And then a third theory that I think is worth considering, I didn't learn about until later, after graduate school, much later, when I was doing some reading on politics when I was on my sabbatical. And that's related to a book, and it's a great book by C. Wright Mills, called The Power Elite. And Mills argued that there's a concentrated elite in America that largely shapes broad policy. And these people know each other and interact with each other, which isn't to say that the other theories are wrong. Actually, you could have both of the other theories in play along with the power elite theory. If you look at, now, this kind of lends itself, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but I don't think they're necessary, because I think a lot of what is done by the power elite is perfectly open. It's out in the open and nobody hides it. The World Economic Forum meets once a year in Davos, Switzerland, and all the, the power brokers are there. And they converse and they argue and they have different points of view and they share ideas. And then a lot of public policy proceeds in the institutions that these people control. So it's not a conspiracy. It's like the interaction of a power elite. Now, when Mills wrote that book in the 1950s, and it's worth reading now, although some of it's outdated, it's still a great book. He wasn't the first one to write about this, but I think it's done rigorously and in a scholarly way. What you see when you read that book is that the power elite has changed sharply since the 1950s. And you may have heard that when he retired from the presidency, President Eisenhower, Ike Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, made a speech about what he called the military-industrial complex. And he said that you should be alert to the military-industrial complex. This is one of the most famous presidential speeches. And at that time, I mean, Mills had written his book a few years before the Eisenhower speech, and they're very similar. So, I mean, Mills talks about the same issue. But I think what you see now, I don't think the military-industrial complex is really what runs things. Although I think you can see from these ongoing wars, I don't know if you read the headline on Friday, but there was a big headline that China, that we shot down the Chinese balloon going over the US. Now, I'm not saying it was wrong to do. I mean, I don't know if they were provoking us or what, but what clearly is wrong is that it's a step towards war. And there's absolutely no reason for us and the Chinese to ever have a war. So you got to wonder to this day about this military-industrial complex idea. But I think it's more the case now, excuse me, that finance plays a much bigger role than it did in Mills's book. And the reason it plays this role is that until 1971, the amount of money in the economy was limited by the Bretton Woods Agreement, which made the dollar exchangeable in gold by other countries. And that was then ended in 1971, which then gave the Fed unlimited power to print money. And that in turn was followed by a massive expansion of the power of Wall Street and the visibility of Wall Street and the importance of the stock market and how much people talk about the stock market and what people do for work in the city. The city alone, I mean, when I was a kid, there was manufacturing in New York. These workers would take the subway to work at 5 in the morning. If you went on the subway at 5 in the morning, you'd see these working guys with brown paper bags. That ended by the 1980s. And what expanded all over the place was the real estate boom and Wall Street. And so the real estate boom is also funded. Real estate and Wall Street are interrelated. And so basically, you saw this massive expansion of, you might call it, I forget the writer. There was a book I read a number of years ago. I have to look up his name. Wrote this book, The McDonaldization of America. And you're saying that everything has been turned into George Ritzer. Everything has been turned into McDonald's. But I think in New York, you could say it was the Disneyfication of New York, that New York was turned into a tourist attraction. It's like an investment bank with a tourist attraction. And this was all done from the 1980s on. And I'm not saying it was wrong. I mean, the city had suffered a great deal. It had almost gone bankrupt and there were a lot of other problems. But the thing is, the average working person was completely ignored. And the goods producing sector was eliminated and replaced by services. So anyway, so those are some theories, and I hope that it gives you some food for thought, Alexia, about how our system actually works. Is it really a straightforward democratic system? I do not think so. I don't believe that at all.
Right.
I think there's a combination of factors, and we should be aware of them when we think about our society.
So
All
it's
right,
not
so
just
I've digressed.
so it's not just really, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Go
So
ahead.
it's not really just like laws it's not just us, it's laws that's also in place and stuff like that. From what I was
It's really
getting
what I
from what
didn't
you were
quite hear
saying.
that. It's not just us, it's what?
No, I was saying to agree with you, like it's not just us, it's like the other laws that what you was just talking about, any other systematic stuff that's in place for us to, go by. So I'm
Yeah,
just agreeing with what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, very good. So I'm glad you guys are thinking about this. It's very important. And I think part of what the outcome of that is that the media, which is of course intimately linked, I don't know if you want to call it to the military industrial complex, or you want to call it to the finance, military industrial complex, or the financial complex, or whatever you want to call it. I think it's not simple. I'm not saying there's one interest group that rules everything, but I think it's a multiple set of interest groups that have an elite in common, and they know each other very often. The media is intimately connected to this. And so much of what you get on the media is influence intended to direct you to think in certain ways. And I think what you need to think about when you see the media isn't so much what they're saying, but what is it motivating you to think? Like when they publish an article that we shut down a Chinese balloon, what are they trying to get people to think like? Anyway, we'll talk more about this, but an interesting bit of history that you might look into was that in the early 1930s, there was a, whoops, what did I do there? What did I do? In the early 1930s, there was a radio broadcast by a famous, very famous movie guy who had huge influence named Orson Welles. And the title of it was War of the Worlds. And it was based on the H.G. Wells book. And when he did War of the Worlds, Wells pretended that it was actually happening. No one had ever done anything like that before, and I don't think many people have done anything like that since. So he treated this broadcast about an alien invasion as though it was actually happening. And one of the effects of that broadcast was that a lot of people actually believed that there was an alien invasion. They didn't think it was a fictional work. They thought it was true. And I think, you know, and you can look up Orson Welles' War of the World on the internet and actually listen to it. Go ahead, Georgie.
Yeah, when it comes to the aliens, I always believe that governments had made contact already, and that's the truth, you know. Like I cannot just believe we are alone in these galaxies, you know. And
Oh,
I'm sure that like United States made contact already with them, and you
yeah,
know, like I don't think they are good aliens, because like the good aliens would show up on the skies, and that's my opinion only, but that's
good. All right.
should
Yeah,
be
I don't want to
true, you
get into
know.
aliens. That's way off this class, but yeah, we could talk about that sometime. It's an interesting
Okay,
subject. And there's been
all right.
some interesting video on it lately. And I think no one really knows what's going on with that, I would say. But my point is just that the American public was willing to believe that there was an alien invasion going on. And what that tips off the media is that they can say a lot of stuff, but they knew this already from World War One. I mean, World War One, as I said before, was the start of a lot of this stuff, and part of that was the invention of propaganda. You know, and this wasn't just in the U.S; it was in Germany and elsewhere. So, but it was in the U.S. too. So, basically, I think you know the possibility or the probability that the media is functioning in a propaganda mode is something that should always be with you. You should always consider that and not get sucked into what they're infusing society with. All right, so I have to get back to Porter, but before I do, I will take attendance. So today is the 5th of February. And Nabia Ahmed,
Here.
hello.
Here.
Abira
Can you hear me?
Ijaz,
Hi, I'm here too, and it's
hi,
Ajax.
Abira. Aya Alf Etloy,
I'm here.
hello. Olalekin Babalola,
I'm here, Professor.
hello. Dina Bakaj, Dina. Alexander Betts, Alexia Charles,
I'm here.
hello, Alexia.
Hello.
Fidel Charles, Brandon Charles Jimenez, where's everybody? Shokruk
Yes, I'm here.
Ibrahimov,
It's just shock.
Shock, sorry about that, you told me last time too. Shock,
Okay.
Georgie, you were just here. Terry Johnson.
I'm here.
Hi, Terry.
Hi.
Samuel Knight. Samuel? What is this? I got 23 people online and none are answering. Mingjing Li.
I'm here.
Hello, Ming.
Hi.
Yilin. Yilin. Esmira Nabieva.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello.
Hi.
Ludley.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Ludley.
Hi.
Safayette Rahman.
Yes, I'm here.
Mohammed Rabi. Mohammed Rabi. Boris Rusal.
Here.
Hello. Stephanie Torres.
Here.
Hello. Crystal Vargas.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. And Salwa Walid. Salwa.
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
Hi. Hello. Okay, I'm gonna call.
Did you call my name?
Speaking.
Because I was in the thing. I think maybe you spelled it wrong or something. Because I didn't hear it.
Golshoda Muradova.
Yeah, you didn't call it.
Oh yeah, I somehow marked you present. I don't know what I did. Okay, sorry about that, but I got you anyway. Okay, so
I'm also here, so Professor.
Jurak.
Malika.
Oh,
Malika. Okay.
Ian's in chat. I think her baby's sleeping, so she can't like call herself present.
Okay. Malika, did you register before?
No, I registered last week.
You're the one who spoke to me before, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I forgot to enter your name.
Okay.
Okay. Jurek Lova. Okay. So I will give you the last time. Okay, so the ones who are not here, maybe some people dropped, are Dina Bakaj, Alexander Betts. I know he should be here. Alexander, I don't know, maybe he's sleeping. Brandon Charles Jimenez. Samuel Knight.
I know Fidel had commented earlier, but I don't know if he left or not. So I'm just saying, I don't know if he's in the. Let me see. Yeah, no, he's not in here no more. Never mind.
Okay. Okay, Mohammed Rabi, I have. Okay, I see Mohammed Rabi wrote something. And Peter Lamb.
Yeah, it's Muhammad Rabi's me. I don't know. There's another Muhammad in the class.
There's a Mohammed Rabi.
That's me.
Okay, good. I got
Cool.
you.
And Professor, real quick, if you miss one class, that means you're not filling that means you're on possible road to fail or no?
No.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
I give you an attendance grade at the end, which is 20% of your grade based on like if I take attendance 13 times and you're here 12 times, then it's 12 over 13.
Right.
Okay. So whatever that percentage is, I give you that grade.
Professor, I also missed the first class. It was on Sunday because I had this class on Monday. Is that okay?
You have the Monday class?
No, I mean, I add this class on Monday.
Oh, you added the class on Monday. I got it.
Missed first.
Not a problem. Don't worry about that, Malika.
Thank you so much.
Peter Lamb. Peter,
Crystal at
is Peter Lamb here? Peter Lamb? Peter?
And they're in a chat.
I see his name on chat. Are you new, Peter? Are you new to the class? Because I don't have your
Peter
name.
is Yeelan. They wrote in the chat that they're Yeelan. I guess they're just using a different account.
Okay. Your name,
They gotta-
you're registered though, Peter. You registered as Peter Lamb, though, right? Because I don't see Peter Lamb here. That's why I'm wondering.
he has like a background with the sky. If you look in the chat.
Yeah, oh, I see.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So he's registered as Yeelin. So basically he's using
Oh,
another account.
Yeelin.
But his account is
Okay.
under Peter Lamb.
The register is as Lin, but the account's
Okay,
under.
I'll note that those are the same. I had no idea.
No, yeah.
Peter
So
Lamb.
he's saying that he can't speak because the baby's sleeping. So that's
Okay.
why.
All right.
Things happen,
Okay,
things
just to
happen.
clear that up. All right, so I've only got 4 missing people now. Dina, Alexander, Brandon Charles Jimenez, and Samuel Knight. Those 4. Okay, if anyone, if any of those people are here, please let me know. All right, let's get back to
Professor,
yeah.
my name is Aileen Vidals. I emailed you last week that I enrolled late. I registered late for this course.
Okay. Eileen Vidals. Okay. Okay, Eileen, I got you. The idea.
Thank you.
Eileen. Okay, and you were a late arriver too. Okay. No problem. Okay, all right, now let's get back to order. So I was talking about the 5 forces, and the 5 forces, Porter's 5 forces again. Are competitive rivalry, ease of entry, substitutability, bargaining power of buyers, and bargaining power of suppliers. And I said one example of that is Standard Oil. When Standard Oil was a monopoly, they asked the railroads to give them a discount on the oil they shipped. And so the oil they shipped was cheaper to transport than their competitors. Of course, they had more volume, so it cost the railroads less to ship it. But this was one of the things that Ida Tarbell objected to in the history of the Standard Oil Company. Another example is Microsoft. Microsoft supplies the operating systems to most people who use laptops or PCs. So basically, if a laptop manufacturer raises their price, Microsoft can extract the profit. They can charge more. So they have a lot of bargaining power compared to the manufacturers. The manufacturers can't can't do business without Microsoft. So that's an example of bargaining power of supplier. All right, now these 5 forces influence a firm's competitive posture. If you're in an industry where all the products are perfectly substitutable, for example, if you grow potatoes and no one can tell the difference between your potatoes and everyone else's potatoes, you have very little, there's perfect substitutability. There might be competitive rivalry. There's a lot of ease of entry. The buyers have more bargaining power and you have less. So it's hard for you to make something unique out of your product. What you might do is figure out, how am I going to make this product different? Or how can I introduce machinery that costs less so that my potatoes become cheaper than everyone else's? Or can I focus on the needs of a specific group and then grow the kind of potato that group needs? Okay, so that sounds unlikely, but remember that the Native Americans who discovered the potato, the Peruvian civilization really, had hundreds of different kinds of potatoes with many different kinds of qualities. And they were very sophisticated as the kinds of potatoes. We lost track of that. So basically, the way that firms respond to the 5 forces, the response to the 5 forces is through the generic strategies. All right, now there are 4 generic strategies. Number 1, low cost. Okay, the firm that can produce potatoes cheaper, rather the farm that can produce potatoes cheaper than anybody else is the farm that will sell the most potatoes. All right, so if you have a way to reduce your costs, hold everything else constant, you will have a competitive advantage. Low cost became extraordinarily important for Walmart. They figured out, based on the genius of Sam Walton, way after way of cutting price, of cutting costs, which in turn caused them to be able to charge less than almost any other retailer. Part of it was they paid their employees less, so that evoked a hostile reaction from a lot of people, including labor unions. But that wasn't the only way they reduced their costs. And after a lot of pressure, they started to raise the wages a little bit and also give medical insurance. But they're still low cost because they have lots of other low cost techniques. The second way is differentiation. Differentiation means that you make a product that's different from everybody else. So you sell potatoes and I sell potatoes. They're exactly the same. But then I get the idea to cut the potatoes up into French fries and fry them and then sell them as frozen French fries. And I have excellent quality control and I show everyone that they're good and they're easy and you can make just as good French fries, eat more easily with my French fries than with anyone else's. So therefore I have differentiation. I've made something different about my product. How does in an industry, let's say you talk about cigarettes. I don't smoke, but I was just watching this great series from the early 2000s, Mad Men. If you never saw it, I highly recommend it. It's about the advertising business from 1960 to 1970. And, it's very male dominated. And, my wife was uncomfortable with it, even watching it. But in any case, it's a great show because it shows how they thought about differentiation, how they thought about making products unique. And like one of the in the first episode, the Surgeon General has come out with a report about smoking, and the head of Lucky Strike says to the hero of the show, how can we not link our product with death? And he doesn't know what to say, and he's like struggling with it. And then finally he says, wait a second, you can really say anything. All you need to do is create a new product image. And so in real life, the slogan of Lucky Strike is it's toasted. And he goes over this whole thing that, oh, you can say it's toasted, it's in the sunlight, it's, and so all you have to do is create a product image. And this is the idea of differentiation. And of course, all firms with a unique product want to differentiate. When you do the SaaS case, you'll see that their software is very different from all other firms. They are at a much higher level. They don't, if you buy Office software from Microsoft, you get Excel and you get Word and you get some garden variety programs that anyone can use, and they cost $80. What SaaS does is when you buy their software, you get a program that can solve statistical problems related to your marketing strategy, and you get software that can pinpoint who your target market is, and you get software that can solve all kinds of logistical problems. And so they sell software that's on a much higher level than any other firm. And so, or most other firms, there are a few others. And so basically, they charge a lot more for the software, obviously. You're not going to get garden variety Office software from SaaS. You're going to get, software that can do multiple regression, that can do factor analysis, that can do all kinds of sophisticated statistical analysis, but also that can target new applications that the companies bring to SaaS. And so one of the things in the case is that it's not just that SaaS differentiates its product, but that it has a third strategy, focused differentiation, that it's not just that they have a unique product like the Toyota Camry, a unique car, good quality car that's cheap. Everybody wants one, no matter how rich you are, you can't go wrong with a Toyota Camry. You could drive, it's a good car. It's not a Mercedes or a BMW, but it's a darn good car. Focus differentiation is a little different. SaaS doesn't say, what do the students in Business 3240 want in software that I can also sell to corporate America, that I can also sell to K-12 education, that I can sell to everybody. They don't say that. They say, what kind of software can we sell to market, financial, distribution, and other technical analysts in the big companies in corporate America who need to solve statistical problems? And we are going to market software to this elite group, people who already have master's degrees or even PhDs in statistical analysis, who need software to perform statistics, to do statistics. And so they've got who works for them, who does this. Obviously, these are not ordinary people. They're highly qualified mathematicians and computer programmers and systems analysts who know how to design statistical systems. And so this requires a high level of statistical knowledge and a high level of mathematical knowledge and computer programming. And so you can't just compensate such people the way you would a computer programmer at the ordinary company, or a computer programmer even in other software companies. They have to be treated with kid gloves because in order to learn how to do this, you need to be there for your whole career. You need to be there for years. And how are they going to retain people for all this time to focus on the market segments they care about and differentiate the product? So, at SaaS, they've got, their employees are a unique asset. And it's true everywhere, of course. It's true if employees are an asset, if you go to an automobile company or, if you go to any software company to a greater degree, or you go to any manufacturing company, the employees are an asset. But it's even more true at SaaS, where you need to have this people with these unique skills, marketing narrow target markets that they understand and that they develop expertise in satisfying their needs. And so this focused differentiation means that you differentiate the product, but do so in order to focus on the needs of a given segment. Whereas differentiation means that you focus on the broad needs of a market segment. And not of a segment, I said that wrong, on the broad, on differentiation means that you satisfy the broad market, is what I meant to say. So in other words, you've got a product like, say, a McDonald's hamburger. Who likes McDonald's hamburgers? Well, you know, if you watch that movie, The Founder, and I highly recommend it, it's a great movie. One of the, and also I've read a couple of biographies of Ray Kroc, and basically Kroc had a specific target market in mind, namely middle American families. He wanted the McDonald's symbol to be ubiquitous throughout America, as ubiquitous as the American flag. And but he saw like stable communities as his market segment. But of course that it grew from there. So he started with a hugely broad segment, and now McDonald's is everywhere. So who eats McDonald's? Pretty much everybody. I mean, Warren Buffett eats McDonald's, and you know, the bum on the, well, I live on the Bowery now, but I eat McDonald's. So basically, everybody eats McDonald's. So what's special about McDonald's is not that it focuses on a segment, but that there's something unique about it that appeals to everybody. And that was the theme, incidentally, of a really interesting movie about the King of England visiting Franklin Roosevelt during World War II. And the whole story is about the king comes to visit, which is extremely unusual, the president, and lives for a few days with the Roosevelts at Hyde Park. And Roosevelt keeps telling the king, you know, you're going to have hot dogs with us on July 4th. And the king says, you know, the king says, what on earth is he so interested in my having hot dogs? Of course, the King of England eats a very refined cuisine, not hot dogs. But then when the day comes and they have hot dogs, there's like 1 million reporters there. And, you know, that he gives the king the hot dog and he bites it, and like every flash, every light bulb flashes, every camera flashes at that moment. Everybody wants to see the king eating a hot dog. And what that's really saying is that the hot dog is not a differentiated product. The hot dog is eaten by everybody, whether you're Warren Buffett or whether you're just some ordinary rank and file factory worker. Everybody eats a hot dog. So the trick of a hot dog, if it wants to be better, is to make something unique about it, not that they're going to appeal to a different market segment. Okay, so the fourth kind of generic strategy might be called differentiated cost, and it's the least important, but you could think of a pizza chain that charges very little and focuses on low-income customers. So, you know, these like pizza chains that sell like $1 a pizza or whatever, so whatever it is, some low price per pizza, that they are focusing on a specific segment and being low cost. You can sometimes find ethnic products that focus on a given segment but are the low cost producer for that segment. So basically differentiated cost is where you're focusing on a segment and you've got a reduced cost. Okay, so that is my discussion of Porter's five forces. Now, what is the importance of this? Why am I talking about it? That, in other words, all firms adopt a strategy in response to their market condition and in response to the environment. And in turn, HR needs to respond to those strategies by developing a pattern of human resource management that addresses the needs of the firm. So in other words, if you are a firm like Walmart and you employ relatively low wage employees, and you are a firm like SAS and you employ relatively high wage employees, what is the difference in the HR policies between those two companies? Can a company like Walmart follow the philosophy of SAS, and can a company like SAS follow the philosophy of Walmart? And the answer to those questions is no and no. In order to function as a differentiation firm or as a focus firm or as a focus differentiation firm, you need to employ different kinds of people and for different tenures. And so you need to treat them in different ways. Peter, question. Peter, did you have a question? Okay, I guess not. So you have to treat employees in different kinds of firms in different ways. And so HR needs to think about how does it help the firm achieve its goals in its business using the HR policies that are appropriate to the specific type of firm. And this is going to be a theme of the class. All right. Now, if a firm does this, so let's say you're SAS and you've got people with all kinds of unique mathematical and statistical and computer knowledge, what are you going to do? You're going to provide rich benefits. You're going to have a good pension plan. You're going to encourage them to enjoy their work. You're going to give them interesting jobs. You're not going to over supervise. You are going to compensate them well. You're going to be generous with the compensation. So all of this is stuff SAS does. Now, SAS is not worried about cost. They're worried about getting them to focus on a market segment or to produce differentiated products or both. So basically, the HR people at SAS are going to, it's more like a, like a goodie bag. They're going to have lots of goodies. Whereas at Walmart, the people are there for a short time. They're not skilled. The company wants to retain them as long as possible, but doesn't really care if they have a high turnover rate. They know that eventually a lot of them are going to find better jobs. They want to pay the least because they, or at least no more than anyone else, because they want to be the low cost store. So the reason people go to Walmart is because it's cheap. So they want to pay less. And so for them to change that policy required widespread adoption of a higher minimum wage. And in response to that, Walmart did raise its pay for quite a few of its employees. But basically the point is that the two are different. Cost employers are not the same as focus. Focus is probably a little different from differentiation in that focus firms need employees who learn about their market segment. And this isn't stuff you can do without firm-specific knowledge. So you need to stay at the firm a long time and learn about their market segment. All right, so now one question on the discussion board that I discuss is, does an intelligent management approach based on Porter's generic strategies influence HR? But beyond that, HR needs to think about what tools it needs to use to help the firm get the employees it needs. The employees a Walmart needs are going to be different from the employees SAS needs. And they're going to be different from what Wall Street law firm needs, and so on. So, in other words, HR needs to think about catering to the strategy, but is it also true that the strategy facilitates better results for employees? And I would say the answer is yes. That, in other words, if a firm is well managed and it's got an intelligently executed strategy, it will be more profitable. And that's true whether it's cost differentiation or focus differentiation. So basically, a firm that's better managed will be more profitable, and in turn, they will be able to treat the employees better. So well-managed firms are going to be better places to work. And that's true not only if they adopt the right business strategy, but across the board. So in other words, the Japanese firms that excel at total quality management and that have practiced lean manufacturing and have been innovative in advancing management in recent years are generally good places to work. You could say, well, it's not so true for Walmart, which is, I would say, well managed, because they were a cost firm and their employees earn less. And that's debatable. But in most instances, I think a firm with a smart business strategy is going to make more profit, and they in turn will be able to treat their employees better. It's that simple. Now, what are some other environmental factors connected to surrounding firms that HR needs to worry about? And this is in your textbook. Basically, very important to HR are political and governmental and regulatory factors. So in other words, a lot of HR is regulated. We'll talk about that again. But one of the big turning points in the history of HR was the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1974. I'm sorry, 1964. What is it, 1974? 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 changed a lot of things about management and about HR management. And one of the things it did was it put a much greater emphasis on equal opportunity in the workplace. And in order to control and encourage equal opportunity and diversity, HR departments had to become more proactive. that in turn led to an expansion in the role of HR. So there's no question that the Civil Rights Act and EEOC have fostered the importance of HR in America. As well, there was a group of regulatory laws passed in the early 70s under Richard Nixon. It began in the 60s under Johnson and then continued under Nixon. And these include the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the Employee Retirement Income and Security Act. And all of these laws do a lot to regulate human resource management. And HR departments have expanded to comply with a lot of this regulation. Okay, so the environment plays a very big role in HR, and compliance with regulation plays a very big role. All right. Another factor that influences HR is demographics. The baby boomers were the post-war generation. They are now reaching retirement age. The last boomer will reach age 65 in 2029. And so, I am a boomer and I'm over 65. And so basically that generation is now at the top of, it's at the higher levels of management, it's retiring, it's at the end of their career. And it's often argued that they have different attitudes than Generation X, and they have different attitudes than I guess they're called generation, the millennials, and they have different attitudes from Generation Z. I sometimes get these mixed up, but basically management practices do change a little with the changing generations, although I think it's easy to overweight how important it is. But I think one area where generations do make a difference is in like the kind of technology they're used to. So like, I think I'm more used to the PC, and even that was new to me when I was in my 30s. That was somewhat new to me. I didn't grow up with it. Whereas people from your generation have grown up more with smartphones and stuff. So you're more adapted to that kind of technology. And, of course, it'll change over time. It's not going to, the changing technology will not stop with this technology. You're going to see all kinds of new technologies that evolve. Another important factor besides generational differences, regulation, the economy, that plays a role in HR is technology, which I was just talking about, and changes in technical production processes. Our world has gone, and if you look in the 19th century, the world was primarily engaged in agriculture. In the 20th century, it migrated into manufacturing. And by the late 20th century, it was migrating almost totally into services. The percent of the economy now, the percent of the US economy now in manufacturing, I think, is about 13. I'm just looking it up to give you the latest numbers. So in 2021, agriculture and food contributed 5% and contributed 10% to employment. Okay, well, that overstates the role of agriculture. That includes food manufacturing as well. Let me see, Statista has a better, I don't see the answer here. Okay, so. All right, so the number of manufacturing jobs between 2000 and 2010 fell by 5.8 million. And so the percentage now is much lower than it had been. I don't know why I'm not finding the okay, so they say agriculture and food is 5.4%, but that includes food manufacturing. And really, if you just look at the agriculture itself, it's closer to 1 or 2%. There were maybe 3%. I would say 3% is in agriculture. For some reason, I'm not getting a straight statistic. It used to be easy to find, but if you throw in another 13%, yeah, okay. So here's somebody from some environmental site that says agriculture is about 1% of the US economy. If you look at manufacturing as a percent of the US economy, it's 12. So basically, we're at a point now where services are 87%, almost 90% of the entire economy. And I don't think that's going to change. It could be that because of the geopolitical changes and globalization that we talked about last time, there will be some increase in manufacturing here, but it's not going to be big. So basically, we're talking, your jobs are mostly going to be in services. And so the kind of work done in services is different from the kind of work done. Some service jobs do permit unionization, but other service jobs don't. And so I think the trend towards services, with the exception of things like nursing and home health care, some things like that, there is an actors union, but in general, services are not as associated with unionization as goods production or construction. And so this trend towards services has reduced the scope of unionization. And we'll talk more about unionization in a couple of classes, but it has played a huge role in HR. And unions are incredibly important in motivating human resource policies. I don't think they're important now in most firms' day-to-day work, because unions are only in about 8% of private sector firms. And a lot more than that in government. But in the private sector, 6% only is unionized. In the public sector, it's much bigger. It's like 30%, 35%. So basically, unions have played 33% in the public sector. So unions have played a diminishing role in the private sector, in part, in no small part, because of the trend towards service work. And they've played a bigger role in the public sector because of their political power. You'll notice that most government jobs are also service sector, but the government employees have not been shy about unionizing. The opposite is true in the private sector. Relatively few service sector employees are unionized. All right. So basically, when you talk about the environment of firms, whether it's globalization, whether it's regulation, whether it's technology, all of these things HR has to think about and take account of. Now, I'm going to finish up discussion with this topic of your discussion board. Basically, somebody, Georgie before, I think it was Georgie, was raising the question about what is the nature of the American economy in its relationship to the political sphere. And, I put on the whiteboard, I think probably one of the few most important writers on that subject is F.A. Hayek, Friedrich von Hayek. His name he died decades ago. And basically the article I asked you to read, I know it's tough, the use of knowledge in society, is about why market economies are more successful than socialist ones. And when I say socialist, I don't just mean that adopt the rhetoric and symbolism of socialism. You all know about the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was now broken down into the former Soviet Union and Russia. And some of you come from those countries that were linked to the USSR formally. And so you know as much about it as I do, and you know that it didn't in the past succeed economically. But it was also true, if you look at any economy where there's a great degree of centralization and central economic planning, whether it's socialist, fascist, progressive, you'll notice that the real hourly wage in America hasn't risen since 1970. So as we've implemented more centralized government in America, the real hourly wage has stagnated, not to the degree that it did in the USSR, of course, but it hasn't grown the way it once did. Whereas smaller countries that have free markets like Switzerland and Singapore have seen their wages grow more quickly than they have in the US. So what's the difference? Well, basically what Hayek says is that the mechanism used to adjust business strategy to the economy requires that that in order to have a mechanism that's useful in enabling a firm to shift its strategy, the mechanism needs to be flexible. The mechanism needs to be able to respond rapidly to changes. And the changes that the mechanism needs to respond to rapidly are changes in supply and demand. So, for example, if I manufacture steel and the price of iron just went up because of expanded demand in China, I need to be aware in the US that the price of iron has gone up. And so I'm going to be charging higher prices. And the best way to communicate these shifts in demand and supply is the price system. That there is no other method by which shifts in quantity demanded on a day-to-day basis can be instantaneously transmitted to economic decision makers other than price. And the reason is that nobody needs to know where or what is causing the price to change. And typically in an economy, you can't know that. So for example, it may be that in some small town that you've never heard of, there's been a blight of cotton, and this town supplies a lot of the cotton, and you haven't heard about it, but within a day or two, the price of cotton is going up, and so textile manufacturers have to then adjust what they're doing. And they don't know that there's been a blight in this town, but they do know that there's been a shift in the price. And so basically what Hayek is saying is that market economies, because of that price is the outcome of the interaction of supply and demand, that price can fluctuate very quickly, and so make it easy for entrepreneurs to change their production strategies. And the same is true with decentralization, which he also mentions, that entrepreneurs and people who run businesses are not scientific thinkers. They don't have knowledge of a general nature. You know, this is part of the contempt that Sam Ovens has for people who teach strategy, that, the five forces, what a waste. It's BS. From his standpoint, that's true, because he doesn't care about general principles. But if you're a scientist trying to care about general principles and describe broad laws, then you do care about these kind of general principles. And so for a scientist, broad principles are important. For an entrepreneur, that's not what's important, but that doesn't mean that kind of knowledge, the Sam Ovens kind of knowledge, isn't important. What Hayek is saying is that the knowledge of a particular time and place is of immense importance, and people who think that they can establish a 5-year plan in advance that will tell how much inputs we need, how much outputs we need, have no idea that consumer demand changes on a daily basis, and that people who preferred an iPhone yesterday prefer the other kind, Samsung or whatever, a Samsung Galaxy the next day, that these changes occur, and then they prefer an iPhone the day after. I don't mean to take sides. So basically, tastes change very, very rapidly, and this kind of dynamic shifting can't be planned in advance. But you can't plan an entire economy from the center unless you do it in advance. How are you going to tell who to manufacture what unless these plans are made way in advance? And since there's no shifting price, the manufacturers can't change the price readily. So the result of that is that any kind of socialism or centrally planned economy, and it really doesn't matter whether the person doing the planning calls themselves a friend of humanity, an enemy of humanity, a socialist, a Nazi, a progressive, whatever they want to call themselves, it really makes no difference, because the problem has nothing to do with ideology. The problem has to do with the availability of information to the central planner and the ability to shift plans based on the shifting of information. And that's only possible because of free market pricing. And so the only kind of economy consistent with a modern evolving technological base and a modern evolving economic base is a free market one. And this idea that you're going to rationalize, you're going to cut costs is chimerical, because the amount of control that is required to decide we're going to eliminate all the other car companies. We're going to have one car company, and we're going to make this kind of car. We're going to need this much steel. The amount of planning needed to do that can't anticipate all the exigencies, all the new occurrences that occur every day that change how the plan will work. And so what happened in the Soviet Union, and Hayek doesn't talk about this in his article, but it was already recognized by the time he wrote it, and it became widely understood through the work of a guy named Berliner, who published a book in the 1980s, Soviet industry from Stalin to Gorbachev. And it was really a compilation of economic articles he wrote as an American social scientist studying Soviet industry, even under communism. He was allowed to look at Stalinist factories, which was rare. And he wrote a series of articles on this. And what he found was that the Soviets had read extensively about scientific management and understood it. And they understood the production methods of Ford Motor and other capitalist firms. And they also recognized the importance of economic incentives to factory personnel. What they didn't understand is that alone, that the rate of output is not, and this, I have to say, this was misunderstood by a huge percentage of American economists, that the rate of output and the amount produced did not mean that what was produced was of adequate quality. And the only way that you could have such quality is through a competitive system with price. And so what they would do is produce, there were instances, and this was all recorded, where the Soviets would appoint the price of bread in the cities to be a very low level, a very low price, so everyone could get bread. The farmers producing the bread realized they could get a higher price from animal producers, animal husbandry plants that were actually paying more for feed for pigs than for baked bread. And so they would secretly sell the bread to the pig farms and make more money off that than they would have by distributing the bread in the cities. And so the results were ongoing unexplained shortages. And this occurred in many industries. Another example that was famous at the time that Berliner discusses was that in a shoe factory, they told the manager, we will pay you a bonus for more shoe production. And the manager realized that if he only produced left shoes, he could produce twice as many. So he shipped tens of thousands of left shoes with no right shoe. And then the following month shipped the right shoe. This is the kind of thing that went on in the absence of a price system. And these things were being gradually observed in under large-scale socialism. But they were also theoretically being understood by Hayek and his friend and teacher Ludwig von Mises. And the basic principle that I'm describing was recognized by von Mises in the 1920s, and a lot of people just scoffed at it by the 1930s. And a guy named Oscar Lange said, oh, you can have market socialism. And what you do is you do a survey in every town, and the survey says how much to produce and what. But what this ignored completely is that there was only one producer, so there was no ease of entry. So there was no control on quality. So if you have only one producer, they can produce poor quality, excuse the French, pure quality cars, and no one can buy any other kind of car because there's no competition. So basically, Hayek's article is about this, and he's basically saying that in order to have a successful economy, you need to be able to shift the price. Well, what does this have to do with Porter? Well, obviously, the only way you are going to be able to adjust your business strategy is through the kind of market phenomena that Hayek is describing, that cost differentiation and focus are only possible in a free economy of the type that Hayek describes. And that if you have a centrally planned economy, there is no notion of a focus strategy. There is no notion of a cost strategy. And there is certainly no notion of a differentiation strategy. You know, and it's famous if you study the history of the Soviet Union, that when blue jeans became available in the 1970s, I guess, or 80s, that this exploded, that demand exploded. And there were these Polish black marketeers who were importing huge numbers of blue jeans into the Soviet Union because there was such strong demand for it. You know, and a lot of this was the image that, you know, and, you know, the young people saw the Westerners and wanted the fashion and so on. And so none of this was possible in anything other than a free market economy. Now, getting back to Georgie's question, if you want to understand the political ramifications of this insight, and Hayek wrote a book that was his most famous book. It was a bestseller, and it was published by Reader's Digest, believe it or not, and it's still widely read to this day, called The Road to Serfdom. And what Hayek wrote in The Road to Serfdom is that central planning is by nature incompatible with democratic processes. And the reason, so in other words, the idea of a market socialism is like saying a square circle, that you can't have, democratic socialism is a square circle. You can't have, well, market socialism and democratic socialism. They're both square circles. And the reason that you can't have democratic socialism is that the decisions needed to operate an economy and an economic entity cannot be democratic. Okay, in other words, you cannot have a focused strategy and appeal to a majority vote. You cannot appeal to a market segment with a product and have a majority voting on this. You can't say, for example, we're going to produce hotels for the truckers, you know, let's call it Motel 6 or something, and have everybody vote, do we want to produce these motels or don't we? Democracy is incompatible with segmentation. It's incompatible with product differentiation. It's incompatible with low-cost production because everybody needs to agree on a single plan. And you know what Hayek says in The Road to Serfdom is no one will ever agree. No one can ever agree to a democratic solution to the question, you like potato pancakes, but I like French fries, and she likes baked potatoes. And if you have a democratic vote, what are you going to do? You're going to have 30% fries, 30% baked, 10% potato pancakes, and the rest, whatever. No, that's not a solution because nobody knows how many people want which kind of potato pancake, which kind of potato. So you can't have a democracy voting on how much potato pancakes to produce or how much equipment that produces potatoes you're going to invest in. This cannot be known to the public. It's not democratic. And so by definition, if you try to run an economy on the lines of a democracy, what that devolves into is a dictatorship, because you have to appoint people who are now making decisions, how many potatoes to produce, how many carrots to produce, whether to make sweet potatoes, whether to make potato pancakes. Oh, only 5% of people eat potato pancakes, so we're not going to make those. It's not fair to everyone else. So you see, and that's only the kinds of problems I'm talking about are the tip of the iceberg. Now, in the case of the United States, we don't have a socialist economy. Okay, when I talked about before Herbert Crawley and the promise of American life. An important economist, John Bates Clark, argued that you can have a regulated economy with markets. It's not perfectly laissez-faire, but you use market information in order to motivate production decisions. And that kind of economy is what they arrived at. Crowley said, the promise of American life is consumerism. Okay, it's not freedom. Okay, John Bates Clark said you can produce large amounts of consumer goods with large corporations that are producing in accordance with the market. Okay, Hayek countered maybe 30 years after these guys, or 35 years after these guys, Crowley and Clark. Hayek's counter and von Mises's counter in the 20s was, well, wait a second, you better be careful. You can have some degree of regulation, but it's got to be stable. And the more power you download to the state, the more you're going to diverge from a free society, and the more you're going to diverge from the ability to satisfy consumer needs. And so in Hayek, so Clark and Crowley wrote around 1915 or so. Hayek wrote around 1945, and he said, well, look, these countries that had promised a third way in between socialism and capitalism, such as Nazi Germany and fascism, turned out to have economies very much similar to socialism. That the power in the fascist countries became densely concentrated at the top, and they were issuing Hitler had 4-year plans, Stalin had 5-year plans. They weren't that different. And although the companies were allowed to remain in private ownership, they were largely dictated by the Nazi Party, and in Italy by the Fascist Party. And so Hayek is saying, wait a second, the more you centralize an economy, the more you open up the economy to this kind of power. He's not saying it's inevitable, but he's saying that when he was a child, the Germans were debating government intervention. And the first country to adopt an interventionist economy was Germany under Bismarck. They were the first to have what we call the New Deal, that we copied from Germany via Richard T. E. Lee and John R. Commons. And so basically what Hayek was saying is, wait a second, you got to be aware of this. I saw this happen in Germany. I saw them centralize state power. I saw them adopt a mixed economy. And then it wound up with the devil of Hitler and fascism and Nazism. And he said, you guys had better think about that. Well, what happened in Britain, he really wrote The Road to Serfdom to Britain. And then it was subsequently a bestseller in the United States. And what happened in Britain was that the socialists nationalized a chunk of the economy, and they realized it didn't work. And so they retrenched, they backed off, and they privatized most of what they had done. They still have a public healthcare system, but today they've got a largely market economy. In America, we never went that far, but we seem to be traveling in that direction more incrementally. And so there's more adoption of these centrally planned institutions. And what frightens me, I'll be quite honest, in America, we seem to have the threat of dictatorship before we even have socialized the economy completely. So we have, a situation like the FBI lying about presidential elections, or lying about laptops, or the news media colluding with the FBI to manipulate elections. And this is unquestionably the kind of thing that Hayek said, watch out, this is the road to serfdom. And, we've got a permanent bureaucracy. that decides a lot of what happens in the country. And, you know, it's increasingly like of concern. Are they deciding who gets to be president? Is this permanent bureaucracy, Merrick Garland and the FBI and the CIA and George H.W. Bush when he was alive, who was the CIA head at one time? Are these the people deciding who gets to be president? I think there's a lot of reason to be concerned about that. You may disagree, but having a permanent bureaucracy that's partisan, that is making huge decisions every day about the American economy that are unknown to most of us and we're not able to audit, I think is concern for, you know, is cause for concern. All right. So that said, next time we're going to move further. I think I'm going to be talking about labor history. So we can all start thinking about that. And if you have any questions, please see me. Otherwise, have a nice afternoon, and I'll see you next week. And we'll be in class. Somebody asked me about the discussion board. It's due tonight. Is that a problem for anybody? I either put you to sleep or it's not a problem.
I don't think so.
Okay, all right, so we'll do it. Okay, Peter, baby is sleeping. Let's see. Oh, that was we
It's
talked
due
about.
by 11:59 p.m. today, right?
What?
It's due by 11:59 p.m. today, right?
Could you say that one more time? I'm not hearing.
It's due tonight, right? The
Due tonight,
discussion board.
yeah.
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 Okay.
So try to read Porter, Hayek, and the book about why wages rise. I guess I'll start off next time with that, and then we'll talk about labor unions, because actually it's relevant to labor unions. I think next time we're going to talk about labor unions. So next time we'll be in regular class. I should be over this cold by then. I'm a little better today, but I'm still coughing up. So see you next week in class.
Professor,
Have a nice rest of the week.
Professor,
Yeah.
Bye, Professor.
Bye.
is the first class recorded?
Bye, Professor. Thank you.
Bye. Hold on one at a time. I'm having trouble hearing. Let me turn up the sound a little. Go ahead.
I said, is the first class recorded, sir?
Is the what?
Is the like this class is recorded, right?
Yes, I did record it.
Yes. What of the first one is it posted?
The first one, it was in person.
No,
So it's
I
not
didn't
recorded.
record the in-person class. I only recorded
All
the.
right, all right.
Sorry about that. I mean, you're
Yeah,
free to
thank you.
record them. If you want to record the classes, you're welcome to. I have no problem with that.
All right. All right. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Professor. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
What?
Bye, Professor. Have a nice day.
Bye, Malika. See you next time.
Thank you.
Oh, just a quick saying, Professor. I think college is closed next week.
You're right. Thanks
Yeah.
for reminding me. Next week's a holiday. Completely
Yeah.
forgot. Okay, I'll send an email around.
Then I'll see you in the next couple of weeks.
See you in 2 weeks, not 1 week.
Take care, Professor.
Take care. Yes, Crystal. Oh.